So I'm going to take this opportunity to address some of the issues that I promised them that I will at today's press conference, and to ask them to be a bit tolerant of me. Sometimes I'm in a meeting, therefore I can't give comments on a daily basis on issues. And I often use my press conference to give my perspective on several matters. As you're aware, the news cycle here in Ghana seems to be circular. So we are going through several iterations of the same issues. And frankly speaking, it's becoming a bit tedious to almost be repetitive on many of these issues, as egregious as they are, and we must concede that they are serious problems of governance affecting our country. We have a president and a prime minister who are very satisfied, and in this smugness, satisfied with their performance, and in this smugness gives themselves, or they give themselves, high marks for governance and for addressing the problems of Ghana. From talking to people on the ground, they have a very different perspective of how the government is addressing issues critical to their lives. So we have heard the government say they've ended blackout, and the daily travail of people is more blackouts, in fact, sometimes 6-7 times a day. Very far, the reality is far from what we hear from many government officials. We've heard about the country is making progress, but we have seen a decline in most of the sectors and a tremendous loss of jobs almost in every sector, which is contrary to the promise that they have made. And there is this overall sense that we are going nowhere. We're marking time. The businessmen don't want to invest. There is no mood to invest. And so the government, rather than addressing those issues, have been selling for the past 2 years a number of myths. And I just wanted to share my perspective, because going through these issues one by one again, it's a bit boring. But to share my perspective on the things they have been saying. And the biggest one, the biggest myth, the biggest lie that they told before the elections and that they continue to tell is that our economy was founded, or the progress in our economy was founded on the basis of illegal proceeds, on the basis of drug money. 2 years into this government, we have seen no evidence of that. After being in office for 2 years, having had a chance to stop all of the things, the illegal proceeds flowing through gold smuggling and drug trafficking, we have seen no evidence that they have actually stopped anything. In fact, I believe now that we have crossed a new threshold, that every time you have a seemingly serious case of illegality, we don't see any action on it, and that the entire attention of the government is just focused on political opponents. So I wonder what Sidney James, who will go with Basil Williams to a conference on anti-money laundering, will tell the people at the conference what enforcement action this government has taken for 2 years. So we hear a big story about how the government blocked some drugs, and that individuals are wanted, and it's splashed across the newspaper for days. And then later we see, oh, they've withdrawn the charges. We've heard about one person who was engaged in illegal activities in the gold mining sector. That was attributed, that person and his illegal activities were described and attributed to corruption under the PPP. And then we discovered that the person's company was incorporated under this government. It was established, his business activities started under this government. And the fraud, nearly a $1 billion fraud, took place under this government. We have not seen any action on this. We've heard about the $18 billion flowing through the accounts of a permanent secretary. And we all, that person, we saw the wife of the permanent secretary being charged for not supplying a document. So where, first of all, is this evidence that they talk about drug trafficking and drug proceeds? In fact, if you compare the seizures of narcotics that took place in, say, 2014, etc., you will see that in the first half of the year, much more was seized and intercepted than in the period then APNU is in office. And then we've heard about some Guyanese involved in the biggest among the find that was discovered elsewhere, that 4 Guyanese were involved recently. So clearly it seems as though that they did not find a lot of these illegal activities under the PPP in relation to drug trafficking. It was all talk. And they have not taken any action. In fact, if there was a problem, it seems to be getting worse. And hence the report from the US government that Guyana is a major transit point, 2 years under Granger government, of illegal narcotics into the United States of America. So this talk is not substantiated by any action, as I said before, in terms of seizure of narcotics, seizure of large quantities of gold, nor have we seen any person's assets seized, because you can seize people's assets under the Anti-Money Laundering Act, nor have we seen any major case brought against drug traffickers or gold smugglers. So I thought that was the biggest problem of Guyana, but no action by the government. We believe it's all rhetoric. That's the first point. That's the first myth that they continue to perpetrate particularly among their supporters. The second myth, the second lie, is that they found an empty treasury and therefore they had to put in place all of these tax measures just to find money to fund government activities. Well, you cannot find an empty treasury because taxes are collected every single year. It's on a recurrent basis. So in 2014, we collected about $140 billion in taxes. In 2015, it got higher. In 2016, it was about $160 billion in taxes. So you can't find an empty treasury, because every year we close the accounts and we start afresh from January 1, and we collect taxes for that year, and the money gets paid into the consolidated fund from which we use. So it's a lie. You know, as though there was this account somewhere, the consolidated fund, that the PPP took all the money out and they found it empty. Every year, the consolidated fund gets replenished by the taxes collected for that year. So it's a lie. Secondly, all these private accounts that they spoke about that were supposed to have been raided and stolen by the PPP individuals, etc., in housing, in the Forestry Commission, in Geology and Mines Commission, in NFMU, they found tens of billions of dollars sitting in these accounts. We are told that they would be transferred immediately to the Treasury. They did not do that, but they have tons of money. I estimate over $40 billion there alone. That is what they found. And these accounts keep growing all the time because we collect royalty in the forestry sector, and it gets paid and in the mining sector it gets paid into these accounts, etc. So that is, they found about 700 million US in the central bank. The second lie was that they found an empty treasury, therefore they had to tax a lot, people a lot. The third lie was GuySuCo is the big burden and is causing the drag. So they've had to spend $30 billion. The figures are suspect because they keep duplicating or announcing the same number many times. But that, if you look at it, it's a tiny fraction of the revenue collected so far and of the total of the 3 budgets that we have passed that the government passed. GuySuCo cannot be a drag on the economy or causing the problems. It is their inept policies. And that this big debt, ostensibly that the PPP left with GuySuCo, was causing the problem. Well, most of those debts were, a significant part were to government agencies. The GRA, NIS, and the others were long-term debts that were on the government's book. So they're not required, they do not affect now the servicing of those debts, the cash financial position of the entity. That's the third big myth. The fourth one is that they're fighting corruption aggressively. And so, this is another lie. One would have thought that the provisions to avoid corruption in the future would be strengthened. And so that they would look at the tender boards right across the country, because they had claimed that there was significant leakage through procurement fraud. You heard the $28 billion that Gulceran has been speaking about per annum. It's a farcical figure, but let's don't get into that at this point in time. So that was supposed to be a big leakage. Now, what are the reforms that they pursued in the tender board and the tendering system? Zero. What they have done, they've installed cronies in almost all the tender boards across the country, from central level all the way to the regions. And we have seen an unprecedented amount of money spent without going to tender. Contract splitting has never been this bad ever in the history of our country. We have seen $4.8 billion spent in the health sector in just about a 1 year, 14 months period, and $4.4 billion of that not going to any public tender. Or contrast that with even what they accused us of, buying single sourcing from new GPC. It was not, that was through a public procurement process. It was not single sourcing, it was through a pre-qualification system. So we have, and what you see in the public accounts now is just a reflection of what's taking place across Guyana. Imagine an REO buying from the same supplier 15 times in a single day, the same drug, just by splitting the contracts into 15 different contracts so they can avoid going to tender. And that's not seen as criminal. That's not seen as criminal. And these people are walking around freely, and then you go to the GRDB and you say, you pick some people from the board. There were 16 board members in the past. You took the PPP ones along with the senior staff. You charge them, in this case, for not recording, updating a general ledger. Now, board members do not do that. Not that the money is stolen, not that the $300 million over the period went into anyone's pocket, because it didn't go into any private account. I thought when they charge them, you will see these MPs and the others, they've found that they've stolen the money and it has gone into their private accounts. These were money spent on projects that they can audit, they can see, like the rice seed facility, etc. But just that the accounts were not updated. And you charge board members for this. So when we see this big talk about corruption and the 6 members that were charged here, they were charged for procedural issues, not for corruption. In the meantime, you have a daily parade of these public officials from government who are openly engaged in corrupt practices, and they don't get charged. But you go after these people. Let me tell you something. What they have done here is that anyone who sits on any board now, except any board position from this government or any government in the future, must know now they can be charged for things that they don't even know about, that the accountant should be dealing with in the entity, because they don't update general ledgers and stuff. Board members go to meeting, they get a report, they say yes. They tend to sign things generally. The managers bring a check to the chairman of the board, he signs it. Doesn't go and dig into the accounts. So now, from now on, every single board member in Guyana, and I hope they know this, in the future, given the standards set by this government through its vindictiveness, is liable to be charged or liable for criminal action taken against them. This will, I would believe that you'd have a mass resignation from boards in the future, because if people could be charged, like when Clive Thomas was on the board of the Globe Trust and they breached fiduciary responsibility, he should have been charged criminally. The same Clive Thomas. We did not. And so that is what we have found. So again, Azina Bash, that this big corruption, the huge corruption, the 28 billion and the 305 billion and the 1.5 trillion that we are supposed to have stolen, these are the figures, and they keep escalating all the time. And the 305 billion is per annum. You're going to charge someone. The biggest corruption you found here is that this person, that they may have had a problem, there is a procedural issue. She believes that she's entitled to contract gratuity because she has a contract, and so, like all the staff, she received her contract gratuity. didn't steal the money. She has a contract which says contract gratuity, but that she should not have gotten the contract gratuity because she was appointed by the JSC. This is the big corruption that they found on Azina Bash. A girl who is in her third trimester, pregnant, who they drag all the time and keep her for hours at SOCO for frivolous issues, simply because at some point in time her father was a minister under the PVP government. Young, bright, professional woman. This is how you treat her. Drag her before the court for fraud, but it is basically a dispute over whether she was eligible for contract gratuity or not. And then you have the parade of these government officials openly admitting Beverly Alert. Shouldn't she be charged too from the AFC for misapplication, misusing funds? She should have been now before SOCO almost immediately and charged in court. And Azina Bash ends up there only because she's linked to the PPP. So this thing about fighting corruption is all a farce. They have disbanded, as we discovered, and that Ms. Moore pointed out. They have now practically disbanded the Integrity Commission. They have refused to appoint someone to trace assets abroad. You know, an independent group, not Retty Meyer or whatever, but an independent group, either Interpol or an independent group that is specialized in tracing assets. They've refused to accept our recommendations to trace people's assets abroad. And yet they talk about a myth of fighting corruption. In the meanwhile, the corruption level is unprecedented. Unprecedented. I notice Mr. Badal, who heads GPL, got very personal with me about how I'm all sorts of things, etc. When I said that they have collected now about $20 billion in GPL by not adjusting the price of electricity to reflect the lowering of fuel prices, and since fuel is the bulk of their cost. And so he went personal. I don't want to talk much about Badal, but I know the history of Badal. The history of Badal. Badal started with nothing under the PPP. He emerged as a wealthy person. I hope maybe GRA would look into that too, about the companies that they have in Trinidad and Tobago that has the same name as Guyana Stock Feed here, and whether there is transfer pricing. The GRA may want to have a look at a lot of those transactions. So, but that will not happen because he's a member of the coalition. But the reason they put him there is to preside over corrupt practices. So the reason I believe he does not want the public to know the figure, because he refused. He said, Jagdeo is wrong, but I can't tell you what the figure is, because they're busy drawing down from the $20 billion through a series of corrupt practices. This is an entity that awarded a contract for over $1 billion above the second-ranked bidder. And when issues were raised about the quality of the meters that they supply, they said now they're going to test those meters. Over $1 billion. And we heard, and we're hearing that a minister drew down more money on this contract because it's a $6 million US difference between what they awarded it for and what they should have awarded it for. That a substantial sum. And we heard that their GPL money is being used for all sorts of things. For all sorts of things. So Bharrat needs to tell the people of this country how much money is in that account. If I'm wrong, and it's not 20 billion, how much is in the account and what it was over the last several months. So you will see the movement in the account. And Kaicho News was wrong on the Petro-Caribbean. Kaicho News was wrong on the Petro-Caribbean, as the Ministry of Finance pointed out. That you're wrong, that there is a contract. I said it was known publicly. But even if there wasn't a contract, because it went to the Parliament when the transfers took place from Petro-Caribbean to GPL, it was in the estimates. So it's not true that the public did not know about it. I said, even if there wasn't a contract, but there seems to be a contract, as the Ministry of Finance put forward. So they were wrong. Now, I'm talking about Petro-Caribbean. From the central bank managed the funds, and that was audited. There is no corruption there. The central bank gave it to GPL, and properly so, to buy these sets, the Hope Canal. It allowed some of the money to go to pay the rice farmers. If there is corruption in GRDB with the use of the funds, and you find, for example, an individual who stole some of the money, by all means charge that individual. But that is still to be demonstrated. Who stole the money? If money is stolen, it should be easy to find out on which contracts and charge the people who stole the money. And the PPP will never defend those individuals where you've investigated it and you've seen illegal proceeds flowing into their accounts or to their benefit. But you cannot keep making this charge about, in a general way, that there is corruption. And so that is why the Petro-Caribbean funds were used properly for the growth of the rice industry. And it's not true, as they said, as the Kaicho News article pointed out too, but they made an excuse for Harman, that it's not true that they found zero. The audits found nearly $2 billion in the Petro-Caribbean fund that was transferred to the treasury. Secondly, we left $2.3 billion at GRDB in an account. One should find out where this money has gone so far. From 2014 to now, from 2015 to now, what's the status of that account that had $2.3 billion that they could have helped to fund some program to keep the rice industry booming, but they did not choose that. So I'm not going to go through all the other acts of corruption, just to tell you that it's a myth that they are fighting corruption. The fifth myth is things will get better in the future. Things will get better only if you work at them getting better. This government has no plan for addressing any of the decline in any of the sectors in our economy. So not downsizing sugar and is not a plan for the future. The rice industry, no help. None of the sectors, on small mining, on the forestry sector, on stimulating housing, no coherent plan. So how are things going to get better? And I would urge the newspapers to do a survey of local businessmen. And you will find now that they are very, very cautious about investing. So if they're not going to invest, where are the jobs going to come from? And with the dismal performance of the government itself in terms of implementing its capital program, etc., then it's going to even get worse. As I said, aggregate demand is shrinking, and they're taking more out of people's disposable income. So things are not going to get better. They're going to get worse unless you work at them in a coherent fashion. We've seen no plan for doing this except one, this promise of handouts in the future from the oil proceeds. And the lies that they keep telling people about they're going to get free gas, that the Crab Island project will go forward, and that they'll get 10,000 jobs, that they're going to give them all checks. You know, when the oil money come in, nobody has to work anymore. They're going to get checks from the government, etc. If you could very well get zero. You could very well get zero in the early days. And I saw even Kaieteur News helping by projecting some wonderful proceeds that may come in. Well, it's not going to happen. All of those things about $200 billion, the value of the oil, it looks good on paper. It lights up a dollar sign in people's eyes. By the time it gets to us, or if it gets to us, it's going to be in smaller quantities, and by that time, the rest of the economy is totally destroyed. And so, no brighter future. Thinks that this is just a wish. Working on social cohesion, you know our views on that. This is another myth. It is a good governance kind of thing, like constitutional reform, that they have no real interest in. It's divisive. The green economy that they've just gotten all these consultants and tons of people doing work on will never be implemented, because it's just like a textbook. Went through it. It's almost like taking a textbook on green growth and green economy and translating into Guyana, putting it in a Guyana context with just a few changes. But it does not deal with the fundamental issue of how do we change the growth trajectory from one that is polluting to a green one without affecting our prosperity, national prosperity. It does not deal with that. It's not focused on earning money for Guyana. Our view was that with the approach that we had, the $250 million deal we had with Norway would have been extended by now, and that by within maybe the next 10 years, it could go to as much as $1 billion of proceeds, if US dollars I'm talking about, which will be more earning than even the traditional exports, gold and rice and maybe bauxite all put together. And why? Because we have to focus heavily on the development of the market for trading forest carbon. And that means a lot of international advocacy. We have lost valuable ground and a profile in the international arena because of this dodo-ness of this government. That we fall asleep everywhere, we do that, and then people don't pay attention to what we're doing anymore. They don't take us seriously. And so that is not going anywhere. We're missing a big opportunity. The myth about improving social services is all true. What improvements in education? You tell me. This Granger said he will have an education government, except going after the UG students who would owed money in the loan program, raising the fees at the University of Guyana, and putting the VAT on education. What else? What signal achievement? They're still running behind the Cato school. That Cato school, something was wrong there in Cato. So fix the Cato school, but what are you doing for the country and our children? And you're going to make it harder now for them to access data, because you've just taxed data too. So we can't use ICT as a tool now for educational purposes, because it's just become more expensive. So these are just some of the things. And then I've seen a new one resurrected now as they get more desperate, that the PPP is racist. And so I've spoken about the online attempts to polarize the country already. and it's a dedicated attempt. But they have said, they resurrected that the PPP killed 400 black men in the past. And you know this has been going around, and I see it's starting to rear its head again. It starts by with a few of their propagandists. And so I attempted to look at this issue when it first came up years ago. And I got the staff to download the names that they had of these 400 people that were killed by the PPP, 400 black men. And so I'll just go through. It will be interesting reading for you. So number 122 is Lyndon Blackie, London. So this is the person who shot a soldier in the eye, who was shooting up at the entire police force in Eccles, trying to kill and maim our security forces. And they killed him in that battle, a criminal. But he is one of the 400 black men that the PPP killed. On that same list, you have a Ramdeo Rampasad. You have a Mohammed Shafiq, known as Fatih. You have a Mohammed Shamsuddin Hanif. You have Paul Hardale, Burmese businessman. Leon Fraser, a police superintendent. You have Hari Kosiram, a policeman. Chetram Etwaru, twice, at 168 and 172, he was a security guard. Sherwin Allen, a policeman. Andy Atwell, a policeman. Ramnath Prasad, a cashier accountant. Raul Thomas, a policeman. Mohammed Kayan Bach, a sugar worker. Carlisle Wickham, security guard. Adrian London, police detective. Ramdat Pardat, police constable. Balram Kanai. This is only on one page of the 400. These are the names that the PPP killed, the 400 black men. Autar Kisoon on the next page. Mohammed Lachman. Leroy Loeb, taxi driver. Kwame Pendleton, a wanted man. Fongafat, a dentist. Feroz Bashir, a policeman. Gavin Narain, who is twice here on this list too. This is the sort of thing, Lloyd Singh. These were the 400, but we let this exist in the public domain for too long. And we ignored it because we found how ridiculous it was when they came up with it. So you have a significant number of Indian names. You have policemen who were killed in that period by the bandits. You have wanted people who were killed by the police, all in 400 black men who were killed by the PPP, the list of 400. And so it is a myth. Again, that is another myth that we took a long time to shatter. It's pure nonsense. And they peddle it all the time. So we welcome Granger's investigation of these issues, because I thought that was one of the reasons why they rushed through the Coroner's Act through the National Assembly, so that they will start investigating the cases. But where is this? I know they rushed it through. They didn't even listen to our amendment, because if an Indian is killed now, or a person of Indo-Guyanese descent, under the law they passed, we must inform the immigration agent general first before the police. Now that is when you had indentureship. So that they didn't even remove that provision, and we pointed it out in the debate that they were so anxious to pass this law that they left in provisions that were even from the colonial times in the Coroner's Act. So heaven forbids one of us get killed. We got to go and look for an immigration agent general from India to inform him first before the police can proceed with the Coroner's Act, with the inquiry. So that's in our law now that this government passed. And the hurry, rush it through Parliament in a single day. We asked for it to go to select committee. They said no. Give me one instance, over a year has passed, one instance where they have used this. And I heard Glenn Lal is worried that he might be the first victim. Oh, well, not victim. Well, I heard he might be subjected to this. That's why he's giving you instructions. He's giving you instructions to take the paper in a particular direction. Yeah. But I didn't go after this. On GuySuCo, I want to urge the sugar workers that, and I've been doing this at the meetings I've had in the community, that they must, everyone in the community, man, woman, and children, man, woman, children, they must all show this government their displeasure at what they're doing to destroy their livelihoods, as people have done in Georgetown with the parking meter, as people across race and across politics, as people have done with the VAT on education. They've come out and showed their displeasure. And do so peacefully, but in large numbers. That's what I've said to them. And I hope people continue to do this in the sugar belt. Because this government believes it's saving the industry. They pretend to people they're just taking away 10,000 jobs from sugar workers, but they're saving these sugar workers and love them a lot. And now I've heard the next iteration in this is that if the workers don't show up at IFLOT from Wales, they may have to close Wales too. IFLOT, they may have to close IFLOT too. So that's not on the white paper. And frankly speaking, I don't know whether the white paper will be debated. We were promised a debate in the parliament, but from what they told me is that the minister did not table the report. He just read it under a statement by a minister. So I hope that that's just a procedural, I have it wrong, and that there will be a full-fledged debate on the white paper that is before the parliament. But the ink had not dried on the white paper as yet, which in itself is hopelessly ill-conceived, misconceived, and does not address the future of the industry or the critical concern of the workers. Diversification into what? How are we going to ensure there's no loss of welfare? Nothing of that sort. This is not GuySuCo's white paper. This is the government of Guyana white paper. Now, GuySuCo may be concerned about profitability as a company, but the government has to be concerned about the economics and about people's livelihoods. There's a big difference between a government's white paper and a profit and loss statement by a company making decisions. So the government has failed on those standards by tabling this white paper, not addressing those critical issues. Nevertheless, that will be debated in Parliament. But now we've heard a new threat, even before that we have had that debate, that IFLOT may go. And this betrays the thinking in the government, in some circles in the government. And they don't understand that they're not putting only sugar at risk, but our country at risk and its well-being. So they can easily give the workers their severance, as we did in the past, because the Severance Act says if you go beyond 10 miles, the worker has a right to refuse employment if the location. If they can easily pay them their termination benefits and then re-employ people on a new contract, as what we did. So then you don't have a dispute. That could be done easily. And this is what we're urging. Terminate people, give them their benefits, and then they start afresh with no. So even if you terminate them in the future, they're not going to have accrued benefits like they did in the past, because those are all paid off. It's simple matter. But my feeling is that they're not going this route, largely because they do not want, they want another excuse to go after IFLOT. I'd urge the workers to be very vigilant. The next thing is that we have seen this horrific flooding in region 7 and 8, and the untold hardships it has brought to those communities. The suffering of people where their entire, their properties have been destroyed, their homes washed away, their crops washed away, their struggle to get even sustenance. And so we have been getting reports, but the reports are not because of what has happened with communications, etc. We have not been getting reports from every village, but generally about the situation there. When Nigel Darmlal called me because someone, they got message from the interior, when the flooding had just started, I said to him, please contact the CDC. Please contact the CDC, and I want to urge that the government spares no effort in bringing relief to people in these areas. That we have not, at this point in time, we have heard from the CDC that they are doing work in the area, but we have had no assessment about the adequacy of those efforts. And so at some point in time, because of the communication blackout, so we'll, at some point in time, we'll brief you, because we have people on the ground, we have structures on the ground in the PVP, we have supporters on the ground, and we will tell you about how they feel, whether the efforts by the government has been adequate. In the meantime, though, I would urge that the government spares no expense or effort to bring relief to people in those regions who are suffering tremendously. We're aware of those hardships. I'll end there.